Assalamu alaikum and welcome to all of you. My name is Tanveer Taimur and today I will be presenting our research work that we have done on the analysis of carbon footprint of the twin cities of Pakistan, Islamabad and Rawalpindi. In today's presentation, we will be covering the following elements. Just to give you an overview, let's start. We will be sharing some background knowledge about climate change and carbon footprint. Then we will be looking into our data. And at last, some data-driven insights and recommendation will be given in this presentation. So climate change. Climate change is the long-term change in the weather pattern of a place. Climate change is occurring due to the global warming. Just you can see in the graph or in the picture, the average global temperature of the globe has been rising, which is due to the greenhouse effect. Climate change have devastating effects on our lives. Like from the right picture, you can see a place in Swat has been destroyed by the floods, or from the left picture, you can see the glaciers are melting. So greenhouse gas effect is the main cause of the global warming due to which the climate change is occurring. So for that, we have to understand the greenhouse gases. Carbon footprint. The most important thing on which today's research is that what is carbon footprint? Carbon footprint is the total amount of greenhouse gases that an individual is emitting by his or her activities in the environment, which leads to the greenhouse effect and causes climate change. So for our case study, we have selected these three: carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. We have collected our data using Google Forms, and around 409 responses were being collected. So let's go to our data set to see what we have collected from the people. So at start, we were collecting some relevant information about themselves, gender, age, occupation, like these. And then the other Google form was divided into three sections. Firstly, we were taking some information about the transportation, then information relevant about the electricity bills, and at last we were taking some information about the gas usage or gas bill that we are consuming. This is the final data set that we get after applying different methods to fill up the nan values and to replace the outliers. You all might be wondering how these emissions are being calculated. So let's move back to the presentation and understand how we have calculated all these.
Now we will discuss the formula that is used to calculate the total emissions. So emissions are equal to the activity unit of a specific gas and multiplied by that specific emission factor. Like as you can see in the pictures, different emission factors are given for different variables. Like for electricity, there is an emission factor of 0.61. For petrol, there are emission factors given. For natural gas, for LPG. These are the emission factors that we will be using in our code to find the CO2 emissions, NO2 emissions, and CH4 emissions. So let's go to the code and have a look how we are calculating all these values. Here you can see this is a code written for the to calculate the carbon emissions from the electricity. Different emission factors are being initially assigned, and then the initial factor is multiplied with the activity unit. In this case, the activity unit is the electricity usage. So we get the emission factors, all of the three emission of the gases, specific gases. Same as the case with gas usage. Here is the activity unit is the gas usage. To find the emissions from the gas, we are multiplying it with the specific emission factors to get the emissions. Like these are the columns that we obtained from the code: CO2 emissions, CH4 emissions, and NO2 emissions. And then same with the case in case of gas and electricity. And then we have added all these values to get a single values. We'll try to understand some of the demographics of the data. From the data, we have which try to visualize that most of the respondents were male and were in age group of 18 to 22 and were undergraduate, mostly were students. And most of the respondents were from Islamabad and Rawalpindi. And there were some responses that there were other than Islamabad and Rawalpindi. They have been categorized as other. Now, this is the final dashboard that we have concluded from our data analysis. In this dashboard, you can see that the total emissions are much more higher for the CO2 are much more higher than CH4 and NO2. So we can conclude that in the atmosphere, as I earlier concluded that 75% of the greenhouse gas effect is caused by the CO2. So here the emissions are higher in amount for the CO2. If we break down this total emission for the CO2, the most contributor to the emissions are as electricity, then followed by the fuel, and at last 28% amount of these total CO2 emission is contributed by the gas. In case of the CH4 and NO2 emissions, the most contributor in the both case has the fuel with a contribution of 41% and 56% in these two cases. In this histogram, we have tried to visualize the total distribution of the gases. Like for the total CO2 emissions, you can see that the data is positively skewed and most of the emissions of the people are below the mean value. This is a very important graph, that bar chart that we have drawn out from our data. The most CO2 emissions, NO2 emission, and CH4 emissions are emitted by those who have personal car or motorbike. Those who are sharing the rides have lesser emissions, and then who are using the public transport. So this concludes to a very unique point that we should invest in public transport. Based on analysis, we have gathered some points, recommendation for you people to lower the total emissions. We should promote public transport, and that will help us to lower the emissions by 2.2 tons annually. And shifting to EVs can also cut our emission by 50%. Increase renewable energy use can also help us to reduce our emissions by 75% of the required emission reduction. And at last, use of the renewable energy gas resources can also help us to reduce our emission by up to 80%. To conclude this presentation and research, we have tried to find out some data-driven solutions that will provide a part to tackle this crisis effectively. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you have any question, you can ask it in the comment box.